The day the lawyer read my husband's will, I learned what it truly meant to be invisible. Your children will each receive $25 million, the attorney said, his tone practiced and flat, as if he'd said those words 100 times before. My heart thudded in my chest. The air in the mahogany-paneled office felt thick, like it was resisting every breath I took. Then he turned toward me, his expression softening slightly, almost apologetic. "And to you, Mrs. Halston, he leaves this." He placed a sleek black phone on the desk between us. My husband's phone. I blinked at it, the way one might stare at a foreign object that refuses to make sense. A $50 million estate, and this was my share? My sons, Luke and Ethan, exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. I could feel their discomfort radiating across the table, an invisible current of pity and confusion. The phone was locked, of course. My husband, David, had always guarded it like a secret vault. Even after 22 years of marriage, I never knew his passcode. For work, he used to say whenever I reached for it, his smile calm but firm. David had built his empire in the world of finance, a self-made billionaire who believed privacy was the backbone of power. But what kind of man trusts his children with millions, and his wife with only a password he didn't leave behind? I tried to steady my voice. "There must be some mistake," I said, turning to the lawyer. "That can't be it." He hesitated. "I assure you, Mrs. Halston," this was his explicit instruction. The words hung in the air, cold and final. When I walked out of that office, the phone felt heavier than it should have. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd been married to a complicated man who loved control more than comfort. Still, as I sat in the back of the car, the city lights blurring outside the tinted window, I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. He must have left a reason. David wasn't cruel. Calculated, yes. Distant at times. But not cruel. Back at the house, I placed the phone on the kitchen counter and stared at it under the dim glow of the pendant light. It looked almost alive, as if it were waiting for me to decide whether to open it or leave it untouched. And though I didn't know it yet, that single choice, whether or not to unlock the phone, would unravel everything I thought I knew about my husband, my family, and the life I'd been living all along. David Halston had always been a man of contradictions, brilliant and charismatic in public, yet distant and unreadable at home. When people met him, they saw charm wrapped in confidence, the kind that made rooms fall silent when he entered. I used to admire that about him. Maybe that's why I ignored how often that same confidence felt like a wall between us. We met 25 years ago in Boston, when I was working as a junior journalist chasing financial stories. He was already the man everyone in the industry wanted to interview, the kind who gave short answers but left you with pages of questions. I should have known then that David never revealed anything he didn't intend to. Our marriage was comfortable, structured, built on mutual respect, not wild passion. We had our 2 sons, Luke and Ethan, both bright and ambitious in their father's image. Luke, the elder, inherited David's quiet intensity and analytical mind. Ethan, the younger, carried his father's charm but wielded it like a shield. I often felt like the soft space between their edges, the one who held the house together when their father's business trips stretched into weeks. When David passed unexpectedly from a heart attack at 54, grief didn't come in waves. It arrived like static, ever-present, numbing. The funeral was elegant, just as he would have wanted. White lilies, polished speeches, and people who looked more like shareholders than mourners. I remember standing at the altar, watching people whisper condolences they didn't mean. It was there, between rehearsed sympathy and hollow tears, that I realized how little of David I had truly known. The locked phone sitting in my kitchen only magnified that truth. For days, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. The children were busy managing lawyers, investments, and public statements. They treated their inheritance like a project to be managed, while I felt like a ghost haunting the margins of a life I'd once built. At night, I'd find myself reaching for the phone, tracing its edges, wondering what he wanted me to see, or perhaps what he wanted me to discover on my own. Every time I looked at it, I thought of the way he used to pull it away when I came too close. It was always his world, one he didn't invite me into. Maybe this was his final act of control. Or maybe, for the first time, it was his way of setting me free. The thought startled me. The idea that he might have hidden something not to exclude me, but to lead me toward the truth he never had the courage to say aloud. And for the first time since the will reading, I felt the quiet stirrings of something I hadn't felt in months: curiosity. For 3 days, the phone sat untouched beside the coffee maker, a silent challenge I wasn't ready to accept. Every morning, I would glance at it as I passed, telling myself that if David had wanted me to know its contents, he would have told me the passcode. Yet, every night, I'd end up seated at the counter, staring at that unblinking black screen, my reflection faintly visible on its surface. On the 4th night, I gave in. I tried the obvious numbers first: our anniversary, the boys' birthdays, his own. Each time the phone vibrated with quiet refusal, and each failed attempt deepened the ache behind my ribs. I almost laughed at myself. After 2 decades of marriage, it seemed absurd that I couldn't even guess the numbers that defined his world. I considered asking the boys. But what would I even say? Your father left me a locked phone, and nothing else. They were grieving in their own ways, their attention swallowed by lawyers and estate managers. I didn't want to seem desperate or foolish, though deep down, I already felt both. Then, late one evening, as I was cleaning out his study, I found something that made my breath catch: a small, leather-bound notebook, tucked behind a row of old financial journals. The cover was worn, the pages filled with neat, slanted handwriting. David had never been one for journaling, at least not that I'd known. I skimmed through the pages, notes on meetings, fragments of thoughts, addresses, and scattered reminders. But near the back, one line stood out, written in heavier ink, as if his hand had trembled. When she finally sees, she'll understand everything. The words sent a chill crawling down my spine. That night, I took the phone from the counter and entered the date written beside that line: 0924, September 24th. Our wedding anniversary. My hand shook as I pressed the digits, and for a heartbeat, I thought I'd failed again. But then, the screen flickered to life. The background photo wasn't of our family or the house or the firm. It was a picture of a cottage by a lake. One I didn't recognize. As I began scrolling through the phone, I noticed something peculiar. No recent messages, no social media, no emails. Just a single folder labeled for Claire. My name. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to open it. The phone, warm in my hand, felt almost alive, as though David were standing beside me, waiting for me to choose. When I finally tapped the folder, my breath stalled. Inside were dozens of voice recordings, each marked with a date, spanning the last 6 months of his life. And the first one was titled, "If you're hearing this, it means I couldn't tell you the truth myself." My thumb hovered over the first recording for what felt like an eternity. The room was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator, the kind of silence that pressed down until you could almost hear your heartbeat. Finally, I pressed play. David's voice filled the kitchen. Low, steady, achingly familiar. "Claire," he began, his tone softer than I remembered, stripped of the command that once defined him. "If you're listening to this, it means I ran out of time to explain." A lump rose in my throat. I gripped the edge of the counter, afraid that if I let go, I might shatter. "I know what you must be thinking," he continued, "that I left you nothing. But the truth is, what I left you is everything I couldn't say while I was alive." He paused, a long, quiet exhale that seemed to carry years of regret. The next few recordings were dated weeks apart, each one more personal than the last. In one, he spoke about his heart condition, something he had hidden even from the boys. "I didn't want you to see me weaken," he admitted. "You've always been the strong one, even when I wasn't looking." I felt tears sting my eyes. I had spent years believing my silence kept our marriage peaceful, but listening to him, I realized it had only made us strangers who shared the same address. Then came the recording that changed everything. "I didn't build all of this for money, Claire. Not really. The company, the investments, they were distractions. But there's something else. Something I built for you." My pulse quickened. "In that cottage you see on the phone," he said, voice trembling now, "you'll find what's truly yours. It's in Lake Marin, the place I used to visit before we met. I bought it years ago but never brought you there. I wasn't ready to share it until now." He hesitated before adding, "The will was never meant to insult you. I left the fortune to the boys because they understand numbers. But you understand meaning. The phone, the messages, the cottage, that's where the truth lives." The recording ended with a faint cough, then a whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't love you better while I had the chance." The silence that followed was unbearable. I stood there, trembling, phone pressed to my chest. David's empire had been built on logic, structure, precision, yet the real legacy he left was hidden in emotion, in unfinished words and a secluded place by a lake. For the first time in months, grief gave way to something else: purpose. I wiped my tears, grabbed my keys, and glanced at the photo on the lock screen again. That cottage wasn't just a picture anymore. It was a destination, and perhaps the final chapter of a story I never knew I was living. 2 days later, I was standing on the edge of Lake Marin, the wind carrying the crisp scent of pine and rain-soaked earth. The cottage looked exactly like the photograph, small, weathered, yet inexplicably peaceful, as if time had slowed here on purpose. I hesitated before pushing open the wooden door, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, sunlight streamed through sheer curtains, dust motes swirling like tiny ghosts. Everything was meticulously arranged: a fireplace stacked with logs, a faded rug, 2 armchairs facing the water. It wasn't just a house. It was a sanctuary. On the table rested a sealed envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter written in David's familiar, precise handwriting. "Claire, if you're reading this, it means you followed the breadcrumbs. I bought this cottage long before we were married. I came here whenever life felt louder than I could bear. You once told me that love isn't found in grand gestures, but in the quiet spaces between them. I never forgot that. When I realized my time was running out, I wanted to give you peace, not wealth, not status. You gave me 20 years of unwavering steadiness, of laughter when I deserved silence, of patience when I gave you distance. I didn't know how to say thank you in life, so I built this place for you, to be yours entirely, without noise or expectation. Forgive me for the years I let ambition speak louder than affection. This is my apology, and my promise that somewhere I still love you the way I should have. David." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. For the first time since his death, I cried without anger, without confusion, only release. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the cottage, touching every object as though it were a message left just for me. In the bedroom, a framed photograph rested on the nightstand, a candid shot of me and the boys from years ago. On the back, he'd written, "My real fortune." Outside, the lake shimmered in the late afternoon light, its surface calm and endless. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, its screen reflecting the sky. David hadn't left me with nothing. He'd left me with truth, raw, imperfect, but real. And in a strange way, it was worth more than $50 million ever could be. As I closed the cottage door behind me, I realized this was not an ending, but a quiet beginning. Sometimes love doesn't die. It just waits, hidden in the spaces we were too afraid to look.